We continue with our Discernment of Spirits Mondays, and today we begin with Rule 11. Getting behind here. Rule 11, or we start Rule 11, and Rule 11 kind of wraps up a section of the rules. So the first 4 rules were kind of an introduction. The next 5 were about spiritual desolation, and then this one is both about spiritual desolation and consolation. Sorry, in the 10th, I'm waking up. And the 10th was about consolation, and then 11th is about both. And there's going to be a change in the last 3. So if we were to give a title to this rule, we'd say Rule 11, Spiritual Consolation and Spiritual Desolation, Finding Our Balance. And so I'll read it. It's kind of like a more simple rule, and then just explain it a little bit. The 11th. Let one who is consoled seek to humble himself and lower himself as much as he can, thinking of how little he is capable in the time of desolation without such grace or consolation. On the contrary, let one who is in desolation think that he can do much with God's sufficient grace to resist all his enemies, taking strength in his Creator and Lord. So in a way, this rule kind of wraps up again the rules that have to do with desolation and the rule 10th that have to do with consolation. And it just kind of gives like a little bit of advice in this reality of the spiritual life, where we're going to be switching between spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation. And it's a way to kind of, maybe try to not have like these huge peaks, right? It's almost like wanting to be kind of steady. We don't want it to be like super high and then super low and super high and super low. And so this rule kind of just helps us kind of trying to remain steady as we just normally switch between spiritual consolation and desolation. Basically, the advice is that as we find ourselves in consolation, just really try to embrace a spirit of humility, right? The one who is consoled seek to humble himself and lower himself as much as he can, thinking of how little he is capable in the time of desolation. I often, when I think of myself maybe through difficulty at desolation, I think of like, man, like I was so weak, like why couldn't I just like brace it, right? And when you're in consolation, you're like, yes, I can conquer the world, everything's easy. And so it's easy to get prideful, think you can do more by yourself than you really can. And so the sense of having great humility, that you were living in consolation, but that it is all a gift. And so you can kind of just remember, yeah, when I'm in desolation, I'm just so weak and so needy. And so it allows you to just kind of remain really humble. But then, on the contrary, when one is in desolation, one should have this great confidence in the Lord that God's grace is sufficient to resist all his enemies. So there's no reason to not be confident in the Lord's strength, not in oneself, right? And so this is almost like doing an opposite movement. When in consolation, embracing a great spirit of humility, knowing how weak we are when we are in desolation. When we're in desolation, taking this kind of great attitude of strength and confidence of the Lord's grace, who helps us to resist all his enemies. So this is Rule 11, Spiritual Consolation and Spiritual Desolation, Finding Our Balance. And we'll pick up with Rule 12 next week.